Biblical masculinity and weakness. The Apostle Paul was given a thorn in his flesh for the purpose of keeping him from feeling too exalted. He was the chief architect of the New Testament church, and his fame had spread abroad. In a day well before mass communication, people thousands of miles away, places he had never been, all knew his name. This man of letters, a man understood to be brilliant even in his own day, turning the world upside down wherever he went. No man is completely above the flesh. We're all susceptible to pride and ego. Any man that God will use for a notable purpose will necessarily have to suffer somewhere along the way. Moses on the backside of the desert, Joseph in an Egyptian dungeon, David fleeing for his life. The key points in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 are that Paul clearly says the thorn was to keep him from being exalted above measure. He mentions this twice in the same verse. And that God's strength is made perfect in Paul's weakness. Paul, as a man, was not being weak. He was not being vulnerable or soft, but in fact was exercising great strength in accepting God's will on the matter. Stoic command of emotion is a key element to objective masculinity, and a man with less emotional control wouldn't have been able to let the matter go. A more emotional man would have been angry, or at least dejected, thinking, why me? And lamenting how much he's done for God and building the new church. And this is how God rewards me? Paul was objectively masculine, however, and didn't allow his emotions to interfere with what his rational mind understood to be the right thing. This unnamed malady, this infirmity that Paul called a thorn in his flesh, was a check on Paul's ego that allowed him to be more fully used of God. In verse 10, Paul says, "When I am weak, then am I strong." The secular mind, lacking spiritual understanding, has trouble grasping this. Was Paul weak or strong? Well, he clearly said he was strong through his weakness. Was this weakness something he embraced? Something in which he had a choice? No. He asked God more than once to take away this thorn from his flesh. This infirmity was not embraced by Paul, but instead Paul embraced the will of God. And through a conscious act of emotional control, Paul then gloried in his infirmities so that the power of Christ would rest on him. Paul never embraced weakness. He had a physical infirmity that he prayed to be healed of, and then because he had command of his emotions, he was able to accept this as God's way of tempering his ego. Anyone teaching that this passage is an instance of Paul being weak or otherwise embracing weakness, they're preaching false doctrine. These are the people that Paul spoke of in 2 Timothy, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. How better to lead the church astray than by convincing men to be weak, vulnerable, and soft.